if people are listening to this going, well, look, that's great for Huw. I don't have 4 hours a week and I don't have the space to do this. What would you say to those people?
Stop watching television. No, I'm kidding.
So did you know that you don't have to own a farm or be a full-time gardener to be totally self-sufficient? Huw Richards and Sam Cooper have worked out the perfect formula for growing all of the fruit and veg you could ever eat on a tiny plot of land. And in this episode of Food Matters, they tell us how. Welcome back to Food Matters. I'm Mick Kelly, the founder of GIY, and throughout this series, I'm meeting the people who are reconnecting us with real, healthy, sustainable food. They tell us why food matters to them and why it should matter to you too. Huw Richards has been growing veg since he was 3 years old. Makes me wonder what I've been doing with my time. When he was 12, he started creating YouTube videos about growing food. He now has over 800,000 YouTube subscribers. And his colleague Sam Cooper is a chef, fermenter, photographer with almost 600,000 followers on Instagram. Together they've just published The Self-Sufficiency Garden, a best-selling book about how we can all become self-sufficient with fruit and veg on a relatively small plot of land. It's a topic that's really close to my heart, so as you can imagine, we've got plenty to talk about.
What we managed to grow per square metre of growing space was 100 portions of food per square metre.
Yeah.
So if you only have, 4 or 6 square metres, you can still produce a significant amount of food. You don't need a whole allotment to make a difference.
Yeah. I listed every single crop that we grew over the whole year, which Huw kept adding to without telling me. So I had to keep going back and adjusting it. You can't trust him. He's got seeds in his pockets. He just goes around planting stuff.
I'm literally sat here in London looking, and there's a constant stream of three-way traffic on both sides, and people are complaining about cold compost bins. I honestly say, get an absolute grip.
There are loads of books on the shelves, including some of mine, about growing your own food and the different ways that you can do it. But while the Self-Sufficiency Garden fits into this category to a certain extent, it's also quite different in many ways. So I started by asking Huw to describe the book and what it sets out to achieve.
Well, it's a very good question, because people are like, is this a gardening book? Or is it a cookbook? It's like, no, it's a self-sufficiency book. Our publishers found it hard to distinguish, what is it? What category? And a couple of people are like, oh, why are there recipes in it? They don't understand it. We'll go into all of the detail about that. But the main goal, the reason why Sam and I kind of really gelled working together, I think it's 3, maybe nearly 4 years now, is that we believe that the production of food and the cooking of it is on the same spectrum. So cooking starts when you sow that seed, and gardening finishes when the food is in your belly. And we don't understand why it's always just seen as two very separate things.
Absolutely.
And so that's what we're trying to do. It just makes complete sense to us to blend the two together. And so that's kind of roughly the beginnings. But the reason as to why the subject of self-sufficiency itself, rather than grow a bit and eat a bit, is that there's a lot more of various reasons to that.
It's a bonkers distinction between a growing and cooking book, because to my mind, as you say, the whole point of growing the food in the first case is to eat it at the end of it. We did a TV series here in Ireland called Grow, Cook, Eat, which had the exact same premise, and I've had that same issue with publishers and bookshops actually, who were like, that book Grow, Cook, Eat, should it be in the gardening section or the cookery section? And we're like,
it should be in both.
Exactly,
and then you get double exposure.
In both. Exactly, it should be in both. But listen, the idea of the 10 meter by 12 by 12.5 meter plot, for spatially challenged people like myself, how big is that? Just give us a guide of is it sort of standard back garden? Is it 2 parking spaces? What do you think?
The easiest way to reference it is exactly half the size of a doubles tennis court. So within the white lines, not anything bigger. Or in other terms, it's exactly half the size of your standard allotment plot. And so that's why we chose it, because it's an accessible size. Allotments are getting smaller. And so we just thought, okay, let's go for something that is usable. And it's amazing because you see all the videos and the photos. When you're actually in the garden, you realize how small it is. You can walk to any end within about 5 seconds. And so, yeah, that's kind of trying to make it accessible to prove. And I think this is a big thing, like, and Sam would agree with this as well, is that it's proving that self-sufficiency, you don't need a farm to be self-sufficient. We're trying to show a refreshed, modernized approach to how people can actually become self-sufficient and change the narrative behind it.
Yeah. So, and that kind of references your original question, because part of the reason why we chose that size is because part of the idea came from concerns with food security and cost of living crisis and the pressures that people are facing, and how to make self-sufficiency as accessible as possible. And I've been doing, years ago now, a lot of talking with my grandma, who's from the northeast coast of England, and she was telling me about growing up with like wartime rations and having to, the Dig for Victory gardens that kind of gave way to the allotments. And how back then, for them, it wasn't this idea of complete self-sufficiency and the good life. It was just self-sufficiency in a supplementary way. It was to supplement what you couldn't get in shops. And I feel like that's sort of it's quite a novel idea to bring back to today in the face of food security and people wanting more control over where their food comes from, is that you don't have to go all in. You don't have to get, acres and acres of land in your own small holding and all the time invested in that. It can be this idea of a supplementary self-sufficiency from a small space.
I love that. And actually, it's funny you should say that, because some of the pictures, the overhead pictures of the garden, did kind of remind me, actually, like the sort of extreme productivity that you can see, and I might add the real neatness and beauty of it. It's incredibly made me feel very bad about my own veg patch. But anyway, it did remind me about those sort of Dig for Victory pamphlets, the old John Seymour self-sufficiency guides. Like it has that feel of it, that you're maximizing the productivity of the space. Every inch of it is used and doing something that's related to food growing. Like it's a real productive space, isn't it?
Massively productive. It is. I had never, because the whole idea for me regarding the book as well is a whole cost of living crisis, and thinking, Hamlet, people can grow their own food. And I am more than happy to go into the nitty gritty financial details where I've done the comparisons of, does it actually save money or not? We can go into that later. Like, I love it. But I had never measured the food, the quantity. So I had no idea how it was going out. And we set this target of, we've got this space, we want to grow 365 kilos of food in a year. So that's the equivalent of 1 kilo of food a day, which is 6 of your 5 a day in terms of portions of veg for 2 adults. What ended up happening by the end of the year is that we grew just under 600 kilos. So it was 586 kilos of food, which on average was just over 5 a day for 4 people from that half-size allotment plot. So yeah, incredibly productive, but that was also spread across about 50 different crops. So you've constantly got different flavors coming through. It's not all just, potatoes, carrots and onions.
Yeah, and all of the research and science is telling us we need to be eating more plants and eating more variety of plants. So that 50 different vegetables is really important in that context as well. Did you put a monetary value on the 580 kilos? Do you know how much that veg is worth?
Yeah, it depends where you're buying it from, because it's hard. Because if I was, say, comparing it to like Aldi, the supermarket, it would be like comparing a Fiat to Ferrari. It's a little bit of an unfair comparison of highly nutrient-dense, homegrown, seasonal food versus something that's been pumped with water and flown over half the world. So, but the rough cost from Aldi would be about, I'll do it in euros. So it'd be about 2,200 odd euros.
Wow.
But when you compare it to say to Waitrose, I'm just going to, because I want to get this right, to just over 3,500 euros
Wow.
Worth of food. Now, if you wanted to go further and compare it to like an organic veg box,
yeah, which it is, I guess, right? Because presumably it was grown organically, so not certified organic, but grown organically.
But what I want to get across is like, okay, yeah, it's a bit, you could just compare it to the most expensive supermarket in the UK, but it's like the closest you get on quality, and people are missing the fact that you're actually growing this high quality food. It's making it accessible rather than, say, getting it from Aldi. So essentially you're getting two savings. You're saving money, but you're also like having much tastier, much more nutritious food as well as a benefit. So it's important to value quality as much as quantity, especially when it comes to feeding yourself.
Yeah.
Speaking of quantity, because I wanted for again, like you say, for people that don't have a grasp of space, how big was the plot? For people who don't have a grasp of like what that amount of weighted food looks like, I actually asked Huw to find an animal that weighed the equivalent amount, so that we could just sort of point and say, yeah, one of those. And he went away and did it and found two animals. One is a moose and the other is a polar bear. So
wow, okay, that's probably a small car as well, 580 kilos, right? It's like it's a lot of weight. And is just to go back to the size of the space again, is it so you said like half a tennis court, which is a brilliant way to visualize it. In terms of the sort of, I know all gardens are big, are different, but like is it like standard back garden size, would you say?
So it depends. Like on average, it's a little bit smaller than the average UK back garden. Now it's bigger for those in the southeast, but it's smaller than those like in the north. But on average, it's around that size for someone's back garden. Now, if you've only got a small space or like a patio or a balcony, what we managed to grow per square meter of growing space was 100 portions of food per square meter.
Yeah.
So if you only have 4 or 6 square meters, you can still produce a significant amount of food. And you could, because this is taking account for, we were growing all of our leafy greens, so those are very lightweight, all of the herbs. We also grew a little bit of fruit as well. So very easily, if you're just focusing on staples, say if you went for potatoes and then leeks afterwards, you could easily be looking at 12 to 15 kilos per square meter, which is nearing the 180 odd portions of food, which is just, when people hear that they can grow that much food in a small space, suddenly you don't need a whole allotment to make a difference.
Yeah, and actually that's really consistent. We did a project here in Waterford, guys, that you'll be interested in, which is we've got a sort of a mock suburban back garden here in Grow HQ, which is overall we've got 3 acres here, but we created a kind of what looks like a standard suburban back garden, and we've got 3 raised beds in it, like 2 meter by 1 meter raised beds, and as part of a course we do called How Food Grows, we grew 50 kilos of veg in 10 months in that space, and I think we put a value of about 550 or 600 euros on the produce. So the figures, I think, are relatively consistent with what you're talking about, and again it shows that even with a smaller space than what you're saying, you can still produce huge amounts of food, and save a lot of money in the process.
And you could be clever about it as well, because salad packs for 100 grams cost like 2 or 3 euros if you're getting it organic, whereas that is so easy to grow at home, and you can, like, the value of salads that you can grow is great. And I also think the other lovely thing about having your own garden is you get to grow crops and flavors that you just can't buy from a supermarket. So it's making all of these fancy things that sometimes Waitrose is like, ooh, look at this, whatever it is, like golden raspberry or something. It's like, no, you can just grow that yourself, which is really fun.
And actually, again, going back to your point about the 50 different veg, I always think still as a grower, that it's amazing that you can grow things that you just won't see in the supermarket. You know, things like, well, I suppose you do see celeriac occasionally, but, you know, things like chard and you know, there's lots of weird and wonderful veg you can try that you just won't get in even the modern supermarket.
Or like Sam likes these green coriander seeds.
Yeah.
Or even just different varieties of tomato. You know, there's an incredible range of flavour to be experienced that, you know, when we have people occasionally visit the garden who maybe are new to gardening, or they're just coming on a volunteer day, and even seasoned gardeners will come in and might try a certain variety of tomato they've not seen before, and you see it just blow their mind.
Yeah.
It takes them to another plane.
Are you guys like, obviously I can see the composting and the sort of circularity of the garden from reading the book. Presumably you're big fans of soil-based growing, because I know there is in urban spaces a lot of focus around hydroponics and you know, more sort of high-tech ways of growing. But how important is the soil to you? And Sam, maybe a second question to you then would be, do you think you can taste the difference in the food?
Obviously, for me, it's looking at working with nature as much as possible. It is like completely chemical free. I don't want to be messing about. I want to work with the seasons. I want to be clever about it. And the healthier the soil, the healthier the plants. And that's really important to me, because I don't want a weak garden that is full of pests and disease. It's a little bit of a metaphor for life, I think. And so with the soil, you have this ability, like the difference between, like, I mean, almost everything that is salad based in a supermarket is grown out of soil. It's grown in a hydroponic setup, and you just need to try it to know it, because what's happening is that the plant isn't forming these natural associations with soil microbes where there's an exchange of nutrients. There is this very scientifically calculated pumping of nutrient, which is sourced from somewhere, into water to grow crops as fast as possible. And when you think about it with supermarkets, farmers or producers are just paid by weight. And so it's less about, because you might have to eat 2 or 3 times the amount in weight of something to have a specific macronutrient that you might have had in a homegrown produce. And yeah, you can taste the difference. And I think any good chef would always prioritize something that's grown from the land, from soil, over something that's grown hydroponically.
Be really interesting to think about, is there like a nutrient density sort of score you could apply to the veg that you've grown, that, you know, because that's like hugely important part of it. It's 580 kilos of veg, fantastic. It's worth $2,500 or $3,000 or whatever the figure is. But if it's that much better for you because it's so nutrient dense from being grown in living soil, you know, what price can you put on that, I wonder?
Well, quite. And it's something that maybe we could focus more on in the coming year, because we're looking at how the garden evolves and documenting that on YouTube for people who, or for everyone, but especially for people who've bought the book and they're following along and they're setting themselves up, is that they can follow along with us for sort of almost future insight as to what we're now trialing, and things like, you know, we accidentally discovered that we overproduced on compost. So we're now downscaling the amount of space that's being used for compost production. So there's little things like that people can follow along on the YouTube channel.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's fascinating to me. I feel like at home I struggle to produce enough compost, and I'm always having to, you know, head to the beach, try and get some seaweed and all these different types of nutrients. But you guys have overproduced compost from, I saw in the pictures, like a three bay compost heap. Is it from that system you're producing too much compost for the size of the garden?
The main thing is for me, I would kind of like define myself as a permaculturalist. I'm really interested in that angle. I'm interested in using it as a design process for trying to make systems as both efficient and productive as possible. When you're thinking about efficiency, you're wanting to think about what input are you putting in and how can you get as many benefits from that output. And so our main way of producing compost was with our hotbeds. Now, someone could be like, okay, a hotbed is great. For those of you listening that don't know what it is, essentially, it's a hot compost bin where you compact the layers a little bit more, so you get a gradual release of heat over a period of months. And
not heated though, Huw, right? Like
no, not heated.
Just so people are, in case they're confused about that.
It's natural heat from the decomposition process. You put a cold frame on top, and then you grow plants within it, and so you create a frost-free growing zone. So you can start things off in January and February that you usually wouldn't be able to start off until April or May. Our last average frost date is mid-May as well, so it's quite late into the season. So that's the thing about hotbed. Okay, you do have to get the materials together, but if you've got access to like stable manure, horse manure, that's great. We use a lot of just leaves and seaweed. That works really well. We've put the effort. We've got this massive first bulk of compost, but then we're growing food essentially out of season because it is so early, but it's completely natural. So that is when fresh food is actually quite expensive in the shops. We're actually able to grow it ourselves. So that's a big part. You're growing foods that has far less pest and disease issues because you're so early on in the season. You don't have the pest and disease pressures. It's a place using the bottom heat where you can germinate all of your tender seedlings like your peppers and tomatoes. You can then get a double harvest afterwards once the first has come out. And it's vertical as well. Like, it's stacking functions. There's about 25 different benefits to a hotbed for a garden versus just having a single compost heap where you just chuck things on sporadically. So it's being very kind of strategic about where you put that time and what that results in over the long term, not just thinking about the now, it's thinking about 12 months down the line.
Sam, what do you think about that question around the taste in the food? Do you as a chef, do you think you can taste the difference?
100%. I think you can even smell the difference. I think when you walk into certain supermarkets and it's completely void of any sense of smell. And I realise there's a lot of packaging going on as well.
Yeah, they might be piping in a smell, maybe.
Yeah, can you imagine? Yeah. It's probably why they've started sticking bakeries at the back of them.
Yeah.
No, I completely believe that. I believe that food is a biological process. It's not a chemical process. I know it is down at the very, very fine-tuned level, but it is about different scales of biology making nutrients and macronutrients available to one another, and we happen to be a part of that scale. So if we're removing something quite fundamental at the bedrock, which is soil and the living biology that lives in it, that has evolved and adapted, and arguably the whole reason why plants evolved to be able to grow on land is because of the microbiology that supports them.
Yeah. Dan Barber, I don't know if you've come across him.
Oh, we love him.
Yeah. He talks about the carroty carrot. I love that in one of his YouTube talks about how even on I think it's called Blue Hill Farm that he has in upstate New York, where he grows veg to serve his restaurant in Manhattan, and it's he talks about the comparison between the carrots that he grows there in proper soil, regeneratively grown, and even the comparison of them even versus organic carrots that he's buying in for his restaurant from commercial producers, and how there's just no comparison between the two. And I always think it's really interesting to think about why that is. What is it that's so different about food produced in that way that could lead to such a huge taste difference? And then is that connected to nutrition as well? I mean, is taste and nutrition two sides of the one coin?
I believe it is, yeah, 100%. I think our sense of taste, sense of smell is basically it's our way of observing nutrition and the kind of the scale of things that are too small within food, and we've found ways in kitchens, unfortunately, of cheating that by making something a little sweeter, or making it so you get these kind of quick wins. And as you're eating it, if you're unaware and you're eating these things, you don't know someone's maybe put a bit of sugar in or a bit of extra salt or something. It still gives you that little buzz, but it's a superficial buzz.
Yeah.
When compared to something that is properly grown, harvested fresh, potentially preserved, but preserved using natural techniques as well, these things just, flavour is out of this world. And you cannot describe it to someone enough unless they've tried it, and then they get that. So it's a really hard thing, but once you've got some, it's why I like getting people over to the garden and having them try things out for themselves, because you see the whole world opens up. It's like someone who's always enjoyed art suddenly discovering that colours exist. It's like, oh wow, there's this whole other side to it.
Yeah, exactly.
You're walking through this like living buffet, and it's great. But referencing back to Dan Barber, one of my absolute favourite things within that book was the story about going to a plant breeder and asking for, I think it was a tastier butternut squash or something.
Yeah.
And the plant breeder was shocked because he's like, never in my life have I been asked to breed for flavour. And I think that's then like it is an interesting thought, because how shocked he was, and it does show the kind of the global food market, how it is more focused on productivity, shelf life, all of these
durability.
things. The thing referencing as well to Sam and the art, I honestly believe that at the start of the growing season, a garden is a blank canvas, and you can paint it with whatever flavours you want, and that's the joy of it. If you don't like turnips, I'd say firstly, do grow turnips, try them homegrown, because homegrown is different. If you still don't like it, don't feel you need to grow it just because like everyone else is. You get to like choose, because you're far more likely to eat something that you're excited about eating. And that's like a little quick win for feeding yourself.
That's a really interesting point. I think there's probably a couple of veg for me that I didn't like and now do like because I've grown them myself. I think beetroot's one of those. Is there any of them for you? Things you didn't like to eat and now do because you grow them yourself?
I think cucumbers, I was just a bit like, yeah, cucumber, whatever.
Yeah.
But that, like, homegrown or like sun warmed, that was quite a shock. With beetroot, for those of you that have tried homegrown beetroot and still aren't quite on the bandwagon, we will convert you, but the thing that you've got to try is a golden beetroot. So, because that is like, it's almost like pure sweetness that doesn't have that slight earthiness of a purple beetroot. So try a golden, and then tell me you don't like beetroot.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also don't forget they're kind of a 3-in-1 veg. You can eat the stems and you can eat the leaves and all of that as well. So really, really productive.
Exactly.
To the Dan Barber point, like, and I think Sam, you sort of said you can't explain the taste difference to people unless they've done it themselves. I started sort of thinking about it almost like you can sort of taste the life force in the food, and then I realized that sounds really arsey and privileged. So I've stopped saying that, but there is sort of something in it.
Sign?
Yeah, exactly. There is something in that, like you can actually taste the life in the food, and I'm really conscious at this time of the year when there's very little fresh veg available. We're in peak sort of hungry gap, or we are in my garden anyway. That I'm buying more veg and just always disappointed at the flavour.
I think that the microbes on the veg help as well. I think that's kind of the fun of it. You have because when you're snacking in the garden, you're not washing anything. You're just like, okay, maybe like rub a bit of dirt off this carrot or something. But you're getting like the full experience. You're getting that 5-star experience out there in the garden that you wouldn't possibly have in the supermarket, because it's also, everything has to be like so clean and sterile, and it kind of takes the fun away from it.
I'm kind of curious about the time input here, because you've measured very carefully the output and the financial value. Did you measure the time input required to grow the 580 kilos?
Yeah, so I had to work it out based off an average. Because some weeks were going to be more demanding than others, but the average worked out for that space. And one piece of context before this: the way to make your garden as productive or as time efficient as possible, it's all about the planning that you do over winter, which is included within this final time total that I'm going to share. But it's the planning. I spent a day or two creating a month by month plan for the garden. And so for the growing season, I didn't have to really make any decisions. I just looked at what needed sowing and I did it. And so on average per week, it needed about 4 hours of work per week. This is after you've built the garden and everything's all set up. So yeah, on average, some weeks would be maybe like 6 or 8 hours. There were a couple of weeks during the growing season where I literally maybe just spent half an hour watering some seedlings. That is the joy of a small space. It's not overwhelming and demanding. So yeah, 4 hours. And so if you put a money value to it, as well as putting a value to the compost that you make, per hour worked or invested either in the garden or on the garden, as in planning, yielded around €18 worth, a salary of €18 an hour for every hour I put into the garden. That was the value I got back in terms of the compost and the food that was grown.
Wow. Okay.
And likewise with the kitchen stuff, my plan, I was very much aware that this book was going to land in the garden sections of bookshops. So I thought, I'm not preaching to my own chorus. I need to try and make it as accessible and clear as possible and get people in the kitchen to make something really tasty and back out into their gardens as quickly as I can, because they're all going to be gardeners. So that's the whole point for the kitchen chapter of this book, is to make it as quick. I wouldn't say, it's all very accessible and it is very easy, but not in a sense that it's been dumbed down at all. I think there's a lot of books out there that, regarding food, set themselves up as quick and easy. And what that means is you're getting a lesser thing because it's all been dumbed down. Everything in this book is designed to be efficient, quick, and more than anything else, completely versatile in the kitchen. I want people to be able to get through the kitchen chapter and come away from it and say, wow, that's not only set me up for my entire garden to handle absolutely anything that can come out of it, whether it's cut and come again crop, or whether you need to walk in and clear an entire bed of one particular thing, and now you're stuck with it in the kitchen and think, how do I process this? It covers the entire range. But with that in mind, that this book is aimed at working couples or working families who don't have all the time in the world. It needs to fit into their busy lives.
A quick one. Now, I know you get asked on almost every podcast these days to hit that follow or subscribe button, but they never really tell you why that's important. Simply put, if you hit the follow button, it helps us to grow the show, get more great guests, and to reach more people just like you. So it's a small gesture from you that means a huge amount to us. Thanks. Now back to the episode. Huw, one of the things that I wanted to just ask you about is climate change, because certainly we can see it here in our own urban farm here in Waterford, is that it seems to be making things that little bit more unpredictable. What's your sense of you've been growing since you were 12, which I was very impressed.
Since I was 3.
Oh wow.
I started YouTube
12?
when I was 12.
Oh sorry, YouTube when you were 12. Yeah. So you've been doing this a long time. What sort of changes have you seen to the weather patterns? And I guess how can the home grower kind of mitigate against that, I guess, to any extent?
All right. So everyone loves a nice, easy answer. It isn't the answer to everything, but I say it does have the most significant difference. And it is literally down to how much organic matter you have in the soil. So that the number one focus, if you're trying to create a resilient garden, is the organic matter within the soil. There's numerous ways of increasing that without having to rely on compost. But that's number one. And number two, of course, is more like polyculture, diversity of plants. Now, in terms of the climate change side, yes, there are more periods of like prolonged dry weather. Occasionally that then enters drought status. But last year, it was a bit of a challenge for this book because we're not on mains water. we only have either rainwater or access to water from a pond. And we had 8 weeks during the start of the growing season without any rain whatsoever. So we did have to do a bit more watering, but that's it. Like we've had then probably the wettest winter I've ever known. But the great thing about organic matter is that when you need water, it holds on to it. And when you don't need water, it allows it to drain. And I think that is, it's more of a case of extremes in water quantity versus extremes in temperature that's, I think, going to be the biggest challenge for gardeners within our climate anyway.
It does sort of speak to, though, as well, the focus on food security in this book, I think, is really important, and how vulnerable the conventional system is to those weather extremes in a way that maybe the home grower can be a little bit more resilient to. And permaculture principles as well, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think that I think a lot of the reason why people are getting the book is because they are kind of frustrated, or they don't trust the global food system, and they want to feel like a sense of like control, or a sense of security. And one of the things that I want to get across, and it was kind of like at the start in terms of, you don't need a big farm to be self-sufficient. If you want to become self-sufficient, this is how it starts. You get a rosemary plant, you take a cutting. If that cutting's rooted, you now know how to be self-sufficient in rosemary for the rest of your life. Like, that is like the stepping stone onto it. So no matter what your scale, you can start this process, this journey of gradually ticking things off. And then before you know it, you're eating all the salads that you want and everything. So I think there's maybe too much worry about climate change and gardening, to be completely honest with you. That's my honest opinion.
I think you guys will appreciate this. My favorite story about the lunacy of the food chain is related to rosemary. So there's a supermarket not too far away from here that I won't name, that I pulled up in the car park, and there was a rosemary bush in front of me that would keep us all in lamb dinners for the next 50 years. And when I went into the supermarket, I found, lo and behold, like little pouch of rosemary from Kenya as part of the herb, the herb selection in the supermarket. And I was actually going to stand in front of that herb selection and warn people off if they were going to purchase anything, like to say to them, there is free rosemary out in the car park. Just go out and help yourself. Like, take a couple of sprigs, save yourself €3 and all of those food miles from Kenya. But I probably would have been arrested in the shop, so I didn't. But it's an example, I think, isn't it, of just how crazy the food system is sometimes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's just talk about the carbon side of things. There was a research study done by the University of Michigan that I came across a couple of weeks ago, which I'd love to get your opinion on. And it said that the main finding, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, is that urban agriculture, so small scale growing in back gardens and community gardens in urban settings, is worse for the environment in terms of greenhouse gas emissions than conventional agriculture. Now, it was a very provocative sort of finding, and when you read the report itself, it talks a lot about how you grow is very important. But I'd just be curious to get your thoughts about a study like that, guys, and what you think about the importance of how you grow in terms of your sort of greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I'm curious what they define as conventional agriculture, because in my mind, conventional agriculture is the thousands of years worth of small scale farming sites that have supported our species and still do support, like, I think it's somewhere between 60 and 70% of people in the world are supported by small scale local agriculture. But I imagine that they mean what I think of as industrial agriculture.
Yeah.
There is going to be a more sustainable and a less sustainable way of doing everything. And if you're buying in, tons and tons of compost that's packed full of peat, and you're using unsustainable materials and pumping money into even a small scale grow site, then it's not going to be the most sustainable way of doing it. But it's within your control who you choose to support farming-wise by where you spend your money, and it's within your control, if you care about the environment, to grow your own veg or to grow your own food in a sustainable way.
What do you think of that, Huw? I think that's a great point, isn't it? Because you could like get concrete raised beds, use concrete blocks, or buy them. You could fill it full of peat compost. You could cold compost in the garden. There's lots of ways to do it that wouldn't necessarily be so sustainable.
You know what? I genuinely don't care at all. I just
you just want people to grow, right?
Because look, there's a lot of reasons why. Firstly, okay, for some people, especially if it's looking at community gardens, I know so many people that community garden is their only source of like hope in life. It's their only source of greenery. It's their only source of being outside. So we're not even mentioning the insanely positive impact that community gardens have, especially in deprived communities. And so I think that's taking away like a massive slice of the benefits. The other thing is, yes, you could obviously grow in peat and have like single-use plastic. I mean, it's kind of stating the bleeding obvious, isn't it? It just takes a bit of common sense to know what's good for the environment, what isn't. And I think ultimately, most of the stuff that like we grew in our garden, firstly, it comes wrapped in plastic. So that's a big thing. None of the food that we harvested is wrapped in plastic. Okay, right. Complaining about a cold compost bin with a little bit of like methane emissions. Well, you know, what about all of the leaf litter in forests that also like cold compost and everything? Like I'm literally sat here in London looking, and there's a constant stream of like three-way traffic on both sides, and people are complaining about cold compost bins. I honestly say, get an absolute grip.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
Amen
to that is right. Yeah. Look, I think there's a sort of germ of importance in it, in the sense of like being mindful of how you grow. I think that's absolutely true. But the headline, unfortunately, that went around the world is that home growing is more carbon intensive than conventional agriculture, and that's damaging.
Well, yeah, and there's definitely an agenda to that. Not to push on too many buttons, but like for me, the way that I show people like how to grow food, it's trying to grow with the seasons, and it's kind of just the default option. I've never used peat in my life, and it's just like there's much more serious things in the world than it. And I honestly, when I look at my garden, and I've created so much more space for nature and wildlife, we're creating a diversity of polyculture. Like measuring that's so important. We're like insects are on a massive decline, but having diverse allotments, even if half of them are like unkempt or a bit untidy, allotments have been found. There's a recent study that I heard that in urban areas they are like almost infinitely more biodiverse rich than any kind of park or other green space. And so we really should be looking at like the whole perspective, rather than always narrowing in and only talking about that. It's like, you know, the world exists on multiple layers and widths.
Yeah, I think there's a bigger fight to be picked than on small scale gardeners.
Yeah, I agree with that, Sam. Absolutely. I'm curious we've got a very interesting dynamic here, in that, as I said, we've got a 3-acre urban garden, we've got a restaurant here. So the interplay between our head grower Richard here and our head chef JB is really, really interesting. And it's actually it's some of the challenges and tensions that we have here are not the ones you'd expect, which is that, you know, I suppose you might expect the chef expects the veg to be perfect and all of that. Whereas actually our chef is like, you know, our head grower would be like, well, this crop failed and I'm going to put it on the compost heap. And our chef's like, no, don't put it on the compost heap. I can use those kale flowers that have, you know, started, use them as a poor man's broccoli in meals and so on. So it's sort of the opposite of what you would expect. But what's the sort of, that dynamic between yourselves as grower and chef, and what's been interesting about that for you?
Well, I mean, for me, it's definitely it's quite fun, because I feel like as the gardener, I'm in control, and Sam just has to deal with it.
Yeah, we very much we like to flip that idea of consumer demand on its head. You know, I don't apart from putting in like a wish list for seeds once a year and seeing which ones Huw thinks will work at the site, I don't put really any demands on it at all, because I'm often there working in the garden. I'm seeing how things are coming along. Well, I might sneakily steal a few chili pepper leaves before the peppers are there and things like that Huw doesn't normally eat.
Tell me more about that. What are you doing with the chili pepper leaves? That's not something I've come across before.
Oh, they're edible and they're delicious.
Wow.
And yeah, you can, easy enough, you can just chuck them into salads. I think it also helps that I'm a keen gardener, and Huw, I think it's fair to say, absolutely adores food. So we get where each other are coming from as well. But what I was saying before was that we flip that kind of consumer demand on its head. So we grow 100% what suits the land, because that's how you get the best flavour. And it's then down to us, well, public facing, it's down to me, but Huw also does cook a lot of his own stuff. It's down to us to then harvest what is ready when it's available, get to a kitchen, and then decide what to do with it. I think, as we've been talking about Dan Barber a lot, I think it was him who said it's the forage first and create later mentality.
Well, I loved in the kitchen chapter, again, the specificity. Jesus, that's a hard word to say.
It's better than I can
well,
do.
You have to slow down. That's the key. Just where you talk about flavor and the different flavor categories and so on, like that's I think is genius, Sam. Like, can you explain like what was your thinking behind going into such detail around that, and what impact that can have on because it has a value, I think, beyond this book, potentially for people to really understand those different flavor categories.
Yeah, well, it became apparent to me when I started working on this book that I had one chapter to try and cover as like everything that was coming out of the garden for the whole year, and I thought, oh Jesus. So I thought, this can't be just a conventional cookbook. I really can't just approach it as how many recipes can I fit, because I'd run out of space. So instead I thought, what is the easiest way to get people to give people the skills to be able to forage first and create later, so that they can focus purely on what they want to grow and how well it's growing. Then walk in one day to do a harvest and just grab what's available. Part of that is understanding, kind of, in a nutshell, the fundamentals to how flavour works. So if you have something that is, that's particularly bitter, knowing that you can balance it out against something a little bit acidic, and it'll help that. Or if you want to emphasise another quality, you can enhance that. So just seeing in a very clear little chart how those work, and then a list of ingredients that will help you, something that's very like a really salty ingredient that you can just chuck in, and it'll balance other things out. But then, after writing it, my proudest part of the book, from my contributions anyway, is the ingredients chart, where I listed every single crop that we grew over the whole year, which Huw kept adding to without telling me. So I had to keep going back and adjusting it. You can't trust him. He's got seeds in his pockets. He just goes around planting stuff. But he goes through every single crop that we grew and its key flavour profile, how it handles under various conditions. If you've decided to roast it, whether it roasts, what temperature it roasts at, and for how long, whether you need to blanch it before freezing, how long you blanch for, whether it boils. Everything I could possibly think of goes into this chart. And there's a little note at the end for like additional tips, whether it's eaten raw, whether there's a secondary kind of crop, like carrot tops, and turning those into a pesto. There's so much information in that I thought afterwards, this not only is so useful for this book, but it actually makes every other cookbook someone might own more applicable to the garden. Because you can now look through and think, oh, this recipe I really wanted says it needs X amount of carrots, but I haven't got any carrots at the moment. look through the chart and see what handles in the same way. See what might offer us a similar profile. For example, golden beetroot that we were talking about earlier, and just swap it out. And if the recipe calls for it to be roasted or raw, you could look and say, all right, so this might take an extra 10 minutes or be slightly hotter, so I'll just tweak it here and there. But it was actually my mum, when she got her first copy of the book, who she grows some of her own veg as well at home. But she got in touch with me and said, it's actually that chart by itself, because she doesn't have enough space to grow tons and tons of veg. And she's always wanted to get a really nice veg box. But she says she knows there would be ingredients that turned up that she wouldn't know what to do with, and she hates the idea of wasting anything, or at least not making the most of it. But she says having that chart means that she's much more comfortable now actually buying a really nice organic veg box to supplement what she's growing in the garden as well, and just be completely confident that whatever turns up, she'll have a good idea of what to do with it.
I loved that your mum said her favourite part of the book is your part as well. Like, that's just classic mum territory right there. That's really good. Sam, I also really love that you've got a section on fermenting and pickling, because obviously, you know, anyone who grows knows that there's gluts, and there's times when you've just got, you know, more produce than you can use. Like, obviously, I saw in the background there, you've lots of jars of pickles and ferments behind you there. You're obviously a big fan of that. Is it primarily a glut preservation thing, or is it a joy of eating, fermenting or pickling, or a bit of both?
There's times when we're all absolutely swimming in courgettes once a year, and you have to know what to do with it. And yeah, one of my favourite ways to handle those is just to kind of grate it, mix it with salt, make a courgette kraut, and, you know, stick some dill or some fennel fronds in there, some mustard seeds, even juniper, you know, just anything to kind of give it a nice little infusion as well. Set it off, and it's the most space efficient way as well for storing that kind of thing, because you're grating it, so you're increasing that surface area so you can really pack it into something, and then it's there, and it just sits there, and it's ready whenever you need to dip into it. Crack it open, and it's delicious. But it is all,
I've been known to wander the neighbourhood at home in the summer with bags of courgettes, like lobbing them into people's gardens, because they're just relentless. It's just like, you know, I'm all for all the different things you can do, courgette bread and courgette cake and all sorts, but at some point it's just like enough with the courgettes, I think.
Yeah, we didn't actually put all the weighings of the courgettes and marrows into the book, so we would have easily have passed 600 kilos, but we just thought there's no point, like, we're just putting it on the compost, so I thought it was unfair to put that as part of the final list. The other thing as well, that what's got me so interested on the fermentation side, working closely with Sam, is that I don't think I appreciated just how much incredible flavour you get from fermentation, how fermentation unlocks flavours from crops that I would never have experienced before, and I think that's very exciting. So yeah, I just thank you, Sam, for opening my mind.
You're very welcome. I think that comes back full circle to when we were talking about the difference between hydroponics and soil grown crops. Is that it's the microbiology at play, and likewise when you're preserving through fermentation, you're subjecting the ingredients to microbiology a second time round, and it makes it more bioavailable. That's why we're tasting these things. You know, your sense of smell, your olfactory system is detecting the bonds between molecules. That's what makes up your sense of smell. So we can use these things to really pinpoint the nutritional value of food and the kind of the journey it's been on. And fermentation is just yet another stepping stone. It's an additional one that we can apply to things. And there's all sorts of connotations when it comes to, everyone's becoming more aware of gut health and the living biology side to these things.
I think one of the things that I've noticed with my own growing journey is that I've become kind of I won't say I was afraid of sort of experimenting with different parts of plants. But when you think about it, like you have a cauliflower plant, say, that's like this enormous piece of kit, and it just produces this flowering head, which is just the part we eat, and then there's all this other part that we immediately write off as waste or compost material. But I think as a cook, I've become a bit more adventurous and less sort of focused on, willing to try out the carrot tips and the broccoli stalks and as you said there, the pepper, the pepper leaves, the broad bean leaves, things that challenge that assumption about which part of the plant is food.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that when we were, a few years ago now, we were visiting a friend of ours, Jack First, who's the guy that taught us everything we know about hot lids. And he was harvesting all sorts of stuff. He loved sending us home with a big box of freshly harvested things. And I'd never seen carrots with such gigantic tops on them. So I thought, well, I can't just chuck these on the compost pile. And that was, I just very easily, you just stick it all in a blender with some twisted almonds or pine nuts and some cheese, oil, salt, make a pesto out of it. And I never tasted carrot tops like it. They were absolutely, again, it's like saying, if you were a painter or an illustrator and seeing, you're like, oh, I've seen 1,000 shades of green. Wow. I didn't know green could look like that,
Incredible.
It was incredible. So yeah, it's quite often these, like you say, these additional crops that I think people are used to not using them in the kitchen because they're not the parts of the plant that can be easily transported through supermarket systems. So they're often just lopped off and removed. Yeah. And we're just presented with the extra bits, but they're delicious. Yeah. Absolutely beautiful.
I noticed in a market in France one time they were selling the, you know when you get really big charred leaves, the stalks are massive. Like, they look like very large stalks of celery. And they're selling them in the markets, not the tops at all. Like, there was no foliage; they were just the stalks in, being sold like that for gratins or whatever you might want to make with them. I just thought that was a great example of the challenging those assumptions about which part is food. One of the things I just want to maybe getting us towards wrapping up is just to ask you both maybe what surprised you most during this process. Like, you went on a journey here, obviously very specifically to measure the output from this space and to focus on self-sufficiency and focus on food security. What surprised you, Huw, in that process?
What surprised me most, it's always a numbers thing. Obviously, the amount of food grown from that space was very surprising to me because I'd never measured and we'd absolutely blew past our initial target. But what surprised me most is putting the numbers together of the cost of building the garden with like all the bells and whistles, because we went from nothing to full garden. But through the value of what we've produced, by the end of the second year, we'll already have been about €2,000 in profit in comparison to the initial establishing costs of the garden. So the fact that like once it's set up, you're also then going to be saving money for years to come. And I had done it, I proved it. That now gives me confidence to say, you know what, self-sufficiency is very, very possible. And for people listening, you can just do it incrementally. You can start it off. You don't need like raised beds with wooden borders. There's more affordable polytunnel options. Like there's lots of ways to reduce these costs, but like putting it against like time and the initial outlay and also the maintenance each year of what I need to spend each year to keep it going. I now am like, I can say, yes, you can grow food and save money. I have done it. I don't say that with a shadow of a doubt because I've proved it and I can just sit here happy. And if anyone wants to complain, I'm like, go on, fight me. I'll.
Well, okay. Look, just to play devil's advocate for I don't want to fight with you, Huw. You look like you're a big guy and I'm not. So, but just to say, like, if people are listening to this going, well, look, that's great for Huw. This is like, you've been doing this since you were 3 years of age. Your life is built around educating people around food growing and all of that. I don't have 4 hours a week and I don't have the space to do this. What would you say to those people?
Stop watching television. No, I'm kidding. I am kidding. No, what I would say is it's like it comes back round to what are your initial goals, because you want the garden to work for you. You don't want to just be constantly working for the garden. So if you've got, like, I would say, remember, like, this garden produced enough food for 4 people. So if it's just one of you, you know, it's already saving a lot of time and effort. So I'm very sorry, it's too vague of a question to answer, because each individual person I would almost do a specific plan for to put them on the right track. But what I would say is start small and build up. That's the first thing. Like, focus on a couple of things that you can add each year and let the momentum carry you through. The goal of don't overthink the soil health aspect. Your goal as a gardener is to create the right environment for plants to thrive. And the way that you do that is just by adding compost, not causing too much disturbance, sometimes doing a bit of mulching. But it's all covered in my book, or you can just watch it all for free on my YouTube channel. I am very focused on practical, no-nonsense gardening. So I'm focusing on the things that work, that get you to those results for the least amount of time. It's that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I think there's something like your point about stop watching TV. I know you're joking about that, but there is a point, I think, in that's very important, which is that, you know, 4 hours a week to be completely self-sufficient in veg for a family of 4. You know, it does come down to what we choose to spend our time on. And if you don't want to spend your time doing this, fair enough. But you can't also give out about the fact that, like, you don't have the time to do it if you want to do it. So I think that's a really interesting point. And I will say, you know, I really like what you said there about the fact that you can absolutely make this appropriate to your lifestyle, the amount of time you have, the amount of space you have, the amount of people you have, the amount of veg you want to grow. But on the other hand, if you want to go full self-sufficient and really, really, really sort of go at this, your book is an amazing resource for people to do that, because it's got, like, it's a blueprint there about creating the garden in the first case. It holds your hand through the year in terms of the growing. It looks at all the different skills you need around sowing and transplanting and harvesting and so on. And then it covers what to do with all the veg that comes out of it in the cookery section. So, like, it's an amazing resource, and like I just love this book, and I think it's such an important contribution to this whole topic.
I really appreciate that. There's one last bit that relates to all of this, and I think it's just about mindset. So a lot of people judge how successful their garden is or their first year of self-sufficiency, and they make their decision based off that first year. And that first year, like any skill or anything, is always going to be the most expensive, the biggest learning curves, as with anything that you undertake. So the thing that I say to people is, like, say you're buying a house or something, you don't put all of that value of that house on your first year of living there. It's an asset. You want to live there for the rest of your life. Why would you just deem it a success or a failure on that first year based on the value? And I think we need to apply that same mindset to a garden. Self-sufficiency is for the long term. It's about that lifestyle. It's about working for the future. It's not about, of course you can have the short-term sides, but it is about that long-term goal, that journey that you go on, to make a real difference for decades to come.
I think that's a great point. And also, I always feel like when I'm asked this question by journalists around the time input, Huw, I always feel a bit frustrated by it, because I don't resent the 4 hours a week. It's not like it's a chore.
No,
I love it.
It's a joy.
Like it's my happy place. You were saying offline early on that you know, you don't have mobile phone reception in your veg garden. It's the place you go to you know, like to escape. So I think it's the wrong question. But guys, we have a closing tradition on the podcast that we ask the question, why does food matter? So maybe, Sam, we could start with you on that question. I know it's very general, frustratingly general, but why does food matter to you?
If you permit me to be a little bit abstract, I think food is expression, it is memory, it is culture, it is connection, It is a restorative, it's sustenance, and so much more.
Great answer. It wasn't all that abstract either. It was very good.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful. Huw, what about you?
Food matters because it is one of the few things we have that can connect absolutely everyone. And I think this is something that Sam and I are going to be focusing on more in the future, is looking at how we can use food as a way of bringing people together in a space, on one table, not each in our own little tables, but as a magnet to have open, respectful, important conversations, and where we can create relationships and create hope. Because I think this world is feeling very isolated, and I think food presents an opportunity to bring connection.
Brilliant answer.
How's that for fluffy duffy?
No, that's good stuff. Both of you, thank you so much. The book is called The Self-Sufficiency Garden, Huw Richards and Sam Cooper. It's absolutely highly recommended. I absolutely love it. A great credit to you both, and thanks a million for joining us on the podcast.
And thank you to everyone in Ireland who's already got a copy, because we hit the Irish Times bestseller.
Well done.
So thank you.
Excellent stuff.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
That's it for this episode of Food Matters, but we would love you to get more connected to the GIY universe. So we believe that our food system is having a catastrophic impact on people's health and the health of our planet, and we think a movement of people growing some of their own food is the way to fix it. You can stay connected to GIY by signing up to our free newsletter and check out our full range of events, campaigns, resources and courses at giy.ie. Check out the show notes for more information. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.